Good morning, everyone. I'm San Francisco Mayor London Breed, and I want to welcome you here today to talk specifically about the election last night and the results, as well as to talk about today being the first day that we have lifted some restrictions as it relates to indoor masking. Last night, during the race, the voters sent a clear message as it relates to the school board and the need to begin the process to refocus on our children and on what's most important in their lives and what's most important for the future of our schools in San Francisco. I want to take this opportunity to thank the parents and the grassroots organizers who pulled this together and called attention to some of the challenges that exist with the school district. I want to thank the educators who continued to show up and to try and work with our students despite a very challenging 2 years. And I really want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about our next steps and what we plan to do, because although we may think that as a result of this election that this is behind us, there is even more important work that needs to be done moving forward. Over the past couple of weeks, I've had a number of conversations with a number of parents throughout San Francisco, parents that aren't necessarily politically engaged, parents who have struggled, whose kids have struggled, monolingual parents from our Asian community as well as our Latino community, geographically throughout San Francisco, parents who just really felt that they were left out of the process when schools were struggling to reopen during this pandemic. Many of them talked about a lot of the challenges that exist in their lives, and that's really where our focus should have always been. Kids that are usually vibrant and talkative, being a lot more subdued and quiet, and seeing the changes in their kids and the struggles that they're going through, talking to parents who have children who have significant learning challenges, those who have disabilities and other issues, and seeing the rapid decline in their children as a result of what sadly had been happening, not just with the school district, but of course with this pandemic, has really been really tough for them. It was hard to hear these stories. It was hard to hear some of the challenges that these parents were faced, but more importantly, what was made clear to me is their feedback on what they want to see in a new member or members of the school board. They want to focus to be on the fundamental responsibility of the school district, and that is to make sure that we educate our children. Education and the system around education has to be at the forefront of everything that we do. When we think about this pandemic and the challenges, the learning loss, the mental health challenges, has to be our focus. And even talking with a number of educators about what they were experiencing in the classroom and their frustration about inconsistent information. I'm concerned about all parties involved. So in selecting new school board members, we're going to be asking a lot of very hard questions. What are we going to do for those kids who have learning disabilities? What are we going to do for those kids who have special needs? What are we going to do for those kids who don't have parent advocates? How are we going to focus on the challenges around learning loss? How are we going to deal with the challenges around the gaps as it relates to equity? So many questions, so many concerns. How are we going to deal with the budget deficit for the school system, one that is increasingly growing? A new superintendent is expected to be hired. Those decisions are critically important to the long-term success of our school district. Because even though there are some immediate things that we need to address right now today, long-term, we've seen a significant decline in enrollment in our public school system. School assignment has to be revamped in a way that, again, is done fairly and equitably. So a number of these challenges, we are going to be looking for well-rounded school board members who are focused on the schools, who are focused on our children and their success, who are focused on collaboration and working together, who are focused on wanting to hear from different perspectives, whether they're in agreement with those perspectives or not. Bridge builders. That's what we're going to be looking for. And this has all come from many of the parents that I had an opportunity to talk to. Questions that these parents provided me with and want me to ask of the people that I'm going to be interviewing. And to be clear, I am going to be meeting with a number of people to have the conversations around why they think that they would be the best person for the job. You know, I've made appointments before for this city on a number of bodies, including school board, but this is probably one of the hardest decisions that I've ever had to make as it relates to appointments because of the significance of what this means and what the people of San Francisco expect from the people that I will appoint because of the future and the concerns about our kids. None of us knew we'd be in the midst of a global pandemic. There wasn't a playbook for this. And when we think about what happened in San Francisco and what we did, our early actions to save lives, we were a model for the country in the number of people whose lives were saved, in the number of people who have been fully vaccinated and boosted, and we should be proud. A stark contrast to what happened in our school district. The frustration, the uncertainty, the inconsistent information, the lack of clarity, the bickering, the politics, and who suffered the most? Our children. They suffered the most, and they're still suffering. And so we have to put aside all personality conflicts, and we have to focus our attention on addressing what is most important, and that is their future. Now, I met with a lot of parents, but there are a lot of parents out there that can't be advocates for their kids. They may not know how, and I can't help but think, if this pandemic had happened when I was a kid, when my grandmother was raising me, a woman who never had the opportunity to come to the school, if I got in trouble, I had to get sent home. I think about those kids who don't have the parents who have the time because they're working 2 or 3 jobs, or those parents who may feel uncomfortable with speaking out because of their immigrant status, or a number of issues. Those kids who are in abusive homes. I think about all of those kids who don't have advocates, who don't have that level of support that they need, and school was, in some cases, their only outlet. There are going to be a number of heavy conversations happening in the coming weeks because the decision that I make is going to be important. It's going to be important because of, as I said, the short-term and the long-term challenges that the school board faces. So what's next? What's next is there's still votes to be counted. The Department of Elections anticipates that they will be finished counting votes by next week, probably the end of next week. And once they certify the results, they would forward that information to the Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors will need to approve the election results, to certify the election results. That process is expected to take somewhere close to a month. And in that time, I'll be interviewing candidates. In that time, there's a lot of work that needs to continue to be done. We will still do everything we can to work with the school district. And once a vacancy occurs, that's when I'll have an opportunity to appoint. And my hope is that I can make a decision that San Franciscans can be proud of and feel confident about, and feel that the school district is in good hands. So it's going to require our patience and a development, clearly, of a newfound trust because of what's been experienced. So we have still a process involved, still time that we need to take, time where my focus will be on reaching out and meeting with folks and doing everything I can to make the best decision for the kids of our city. So with that, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the mask mandate. Today, officially, the masks are no longer required in places like restaurants, bars, offices, movie theaters, museums, and other indoor settings for vaccinated people. People can still wear their mask. In fact, I know people will still wear their mask. And there may be some businesses that still may require you to wear your mask. Please don't get into arguments about whether or not you're required to wear your mask or not. It's been a hard time for all of us. If a business asks you to wear your mask, wear your mask. Or choose another business. But let's understand this is challenging. I know that some of our regulations have been confusing. 1 minute you're wearing a mask, then you're not, then you are, then you're not. We're in this together, and we have a lot to be proud of. As I said, a leader in the country as it relates to saving lives during a global pandemic that none of us could have predicted. So we should be proud. So this is the home stretch. Our numbers have declined in our hospitalizations and the number of people impacted. And my hope is that as we begin to see that change and more people are boosted and vaccinated, we will see more regulations lifted to the point where masks may not be required in some of those other settings like schools and hospitals and jails and other places where they still are required. So just continue to be patient with us, continue to be patient with those various businesses all over the city, and we will get through this. Thank you. Well, what I can speak to is there's always conversations around money and politics. And at the end of the day, with what we see in these election results, it's clear that many of these San Franciscans are more concerned about our children and what has been happening with the school district and the distractions and the lack of focus and what's more important than they are about our children. And so what is my focus is the children, first and foremost. And whoever is selected will focus on trying to turn the school district around, focus specifically on public schools and enrollment and some of the challenges that exist there. And so the point that you made is something that's news to me, because the fact is there have been a lot of different kinds of people who have been involved in the push for this recall from all walks of life, and to attribute it to one group of people is really not fair to the work that so many of the grassroots people who have children in our public school system have done. I am not disqualifying anyone at this time. I am going to meet with and talk to as many people as I can that I think would serve the San Francisco Unified School District well and focus on our public schools and focus on our children. Christian? Well, I think, I do not regret my decision to appoint Fauga to the school board. Fauga had a lot of skills in working with communities that are on the southeast sector of the city. Many people advocated for him as a voice for them. And I made that decision. He was running already and had a lot of support, and especially had a lot of support from many of the communities that were struggling in our school district. So I don't regret the decision that I make. I'm going to be, in this particular process, thinking about the same things, thinking about those same communities in the decision that I make, and thinking about, more in-depth people who have more in-depth knowledge of, for example, what I heard from parents is they want someone who understands finance. Like the financials of this, they are concerned about the budget deficit and what that might mean for their children. So having people who understand budget and who have knowledge of not just community, but who have the qualifications to understand how an organization is run, hiring and budgeting, and there's a lot of different components to this. So I think, those are going to be things that are added to the conversation in addition to some of the things that I looked for in previous candidates. Yeah, I don't think so. I think, you can't, our children suffered. And it's not about politics. It's not about having a progressive or moderate or a liberal idea. It's about my kid used to be a kid that was social and fun and is now quiet and sad and doesn't smile. And you as a parent feel like there's nothing you can do about that because of what's happening with your child's education. And I think at the end of the day, this was really about what was happening. We're not saying that some of the things happening at the school district weren't important conversations to have. I definitely think renaming schools and looking at the history of some of these names is important. But the problem was the clear communication around when schools would open and how during the process of distance learning we would deal with those challenges of a kindergarten who wasn't even signing in, and the issues that was happening at hand. The fact that those issues weren't put front and center and solutions weren't focused on there, I think is what drove this decision, because that's what I heard from a lot of the people that I talked to. It wasn't about progressive or liberal. And I think that it minimizes the hard work that so many people did to get this on the ballot and to get it passed by trying to attribute it to that. I'm sorry, what? Again, these were people who were pushing and fighting for their children. I can't say that enough. I mean, the stories that I heard over the past couple of weeks would have brought you to tears. So just imagine if it were your child and you felt helpless. You didn't have money to put them in private school or anything, which were, most of the private schools were open, and your kid is struggling. This came from a different place. This came from parents who were upset and frustrated and stressed out, and in many cases trying to work 2, 3 jobs to take care of their kids, single moms and grandmothers and grandfathers. This was, from my perspective, not about politics. Well, I think that's unfair in terms of an assessment. I feel confident that my history of appointments demonstrate that, I'm willing to work with people who have a different ideology than I do in order to make what I believe is the best decision based on input from folks. I mean, one of my first picks worked for someone who actually ran for mayor. We ran against one another. And I think that at the end of the day, I'm a San Franciscan, I love this city, and I'm gonna make a decision that is in the best interest of the entity and in the best interest of the city, and that will also involve feedback from people who really, parents especially, teachers, educators as well, having a well-rounded feedback and number of people to choose from that are recommended from those groups of people are going to be important. So that's really my focus, and my hope is that they are people who will work with me. They are people who will work with the city, because we want to be a partner with the school district. Every time the school district has come to us for money, for resources, I mean, we've gone to them even to push to support them. So we want someone that's going to work with us so that we can help support our children. I think that it's the wrong message right now. I mean, these people work really hard. This was a very grassroots effort, and I think that people should have the ability, if they have a concern with any elected leader, they should have the right to take a recall effort to the ballot. And so I think it's unfortunate, and at a time like this, for the board to make a decision to put this on the ballot is very unfortunate. Well, I know the state is looking at changes to the allocation right now, so that it's not based on specific individual student enrollment, but they're looking at different formulas, and so that's a conversation that will continue. But as you know, Greg, San Francisco is a very expensive place to live, and one of the solutions is one that I've consistently pushed for, and that is to build more housing, to remove a lot of the barriers that obstruct our ability to do so. And just recently, as-of-right housing measure that could have went to the voters to help speed up housing production was rejected by the Board of Supervisors. So we can't keep saying we want it to be more affordable, we want to build more housing, and the decisions we make are counter to that. All right?